Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku crossed the power limit. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Kamino Ward tasted of ash and ozone. It was a bitter, metallic tang that coated the tongue and stung the eyes, a flavor Izuku Midoriya had come to associate with abject failure. Orange light from 100 fires painted the undersides of the roiling black smoke clouds, turning the sky into a bruised, weeping ceiling. The symphony of the city had been replaced by a cacophony of destruction, the shriek of twisting metal, the groan of collapsing concrete, and the distant, panic screams that were being systematically silenced. At the epicenter of this maelstrom stood a monument to Dr. Garaki's depraved genius. It wasn't just a high-end Nomu. It was something more. Something that felt like a final thesis on the subject of anti-hero weaponry. The heroes had dubbed it Terminus, for it felt like the end of every strategy they threw at it. It was vaguely humanoid, a hulking brute of obsidian black muscle layered with plates of what looked like bioorganic armor. Unlike its predecessors, its brain wasn't exposed. Instead, a smooth, featureless faceplate stared out, unnervingly calm in the midst of the chaos it wrought. Its true horror lay in its adaptability. Endeavor, the #1 hero, was learning this the hard way. His prominence burn, a torrent of fire that could melt skyscrapers, had been met with a shimmering, heat-dissipating field that rippled across the Nomu's skin. The creature had absorbed the thermal energy, and used it to fuel a thunderous counterattack, a concussive blast that had sent the flame hero tumbling through the remains of a 7-story office building. He was still fighting, a furious comet of orange, but his attacks were growing less potent, his stamina clearly flagging against the Nomu's seemingly infinite endurance. Katsuki Bakugo was a frantic, explosive hornet, his AP shots peppering Terminus's hide to little effect. The kinetic force of his explosions was being muffled. The impacts landed with a dull thud instead of a sharp crack, the Nomu's flesh rippling like dense gel to disperse the force. He was cursing, screaming, his usual explosive rage now tinged with a sharp edge of desperation. He was being outclassed, and he knew it. Damn it! Just fucking die already! He roared, unleashing a full-power howitzer impact. The resulting explosion was immense, a blinding sphere of light and heat that shook the very foundations of the ward. For a moment, everyone held their breath. Then, the smoke cleared. Terminus stood in the center of the blast crater, its armor singed and smoking, but it was regenerating. Black flesh bubbled and knit itself back together, the damage vanishing in seconds. It hadn't even been slowed down. Izuku felt a cold dread snake its way up his spine. He was already at his limit. Green lightning, the visual tell of one for all, full cowl at 100%, danced and spat across his limbs. His body screamed in protest. The familiar, agonizing sensation of microscopic fractures spreading through his bones was a constant companion. His muscles felt like they were being torn from their anchors with every movement. He had already delivered 3 100% Detroit smashes. The first had punched a clean hole through the creature's chest, which had sealed itself in under 10 seconds. The second had shattered its arm, which had regrown, stronger and thicker than before. The third had been caught. The memory, only minutes old, was seared into his mind. His fist, powered by the sacred torch of 8 generations, had been stopped dead by the Nomu's open palm. The shockwave had shattered every window in a 3-block radius, but the creature itself had merely slid back a few feet, its feet digging deep trenches in the asphalt. Then, it had squeezed. The sound of his own bones grinding together under its grip was a sound he would never forget. Only Bakugo's timely intervention, a point-blank blast to the Nomu's face, had forced it to release him. And now, the situation had devolved from dire to unthinkable. Through a haze of smoke and pain, Izuku saw it. The Nomu had changed tactics. It was no longer focused on the flashy, powerful heroes. It had moved with an intelligent, brutal efficiency, cutting a swathe through the street, and had cornered its true target, Tashinori Yagi. All Might. He was in his skeletal form, a gaunt shadow of the symbol of peace he once was. He had been helping coordinate the civilian evacuation, his mere presence a beacon of hope even in this withered state. But a collapsing building had cut him off, trapping him in a small plaza. Trapping him with Terminus? The Noma stood over him, its hulking frame eclipsing the flickering firelight. It wasn't attacking. It was waiting. Its featureless faceplate was angled down at the man who had been its master's greatest enemy. It was a posture of ultimate triumph and mockery. All might! Izuku's voice was a raw, broken thing. He pushed off, the ground cracking under his feet. One for all screamed through his veins, a river of power threatening to burst its banks. He could feel the ligaments in his legs tearing, but he ignored it. He was a green blur, a bolt of desperate lightning aimed at the heart of the darkness. Faster. I have to be faster. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, cocking his arm back for another smash. This one had to work. It had to. He poured everything into it, his fear, his desperation, his unwavering adoration for the man who had told him he could be a hero. Wyoming. Smash! The air pressure drill of his punch, concentrated to a fine point, slammed into the Noma's back. This time, there was no absorption. The force was too focused. The creature was lifted from its feet, propelled forward like it had been struck by a freight train, but it didn't fly away. With horrifying preternatural speed, it twisted in midair. It used the momentum of his own punch, rotating its body to face him. As it sailed past All Might, one of its massive hands shot out and clamped onto Tashinori's frail arm. It didn't stop. It just took him along for the ride, a human shield, a trophy. The Noma crashed into the side of a ruined bank building, the wall exploding inwards. It landed on its feet amidst the dust and debris, still holding All Might, whose body had gone limp from the whiplash. No! Izuku whispered, landing heavily. His legs buckled, the pain finally becoming too much to ignore. He fell to one knee, panting, his vision swimming. No! No, no, no! Terminus held All Might up, his frail body dangling like a broken doll. The Noma's head tilted. Izuku knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the marrow, that it was studying him. It was using his greatest weakness against him. This was the precipice. The end of the line. 100% was not enough. His body was broken. His mentor was captured. And the monster was learning. A voice, soft and feminine, echoed in the back of his mind. It was Nana Shimura, the seventh user. Izuku. My boy. You can't push any harder. Your body, it will turn to dust. Her voice was followed by others, a chorus of phantoms rising from the depths of the quirk. She's right, ninth, came the steady, ancient voice of Yoichi, the first. You're at the absolute structural limit. You're trying to channel a star through a paper cup. But then, two other voices, harsher and more frantic, snarled over the others. They were the second and third users, the ones who always remained distant, their faces obscured by shadow in the vestige world. Don't you dare! The second's voice was a jagged rasp, filled with a primal fury. You have no idea what you're tinkering with. The dam is already cracking. The third's was a low growl, vibrating with sheer terror. One more push and you'll drown us all. The voices were a maelstrom in his head, a war of caution and terror. They were right. He knew they were right. Every cell in his body was screaming at him to stop. He could feel the power of One for All, a roiling ocean of energy contained within him, and he could feel the cracks forming in the container. But then he looked past the Nomu. He saw Bakugo, his gauntlets smoking, his face pale with a rage that couldn't mask his fear. He saw Endeavor, staggering to his feet, one arm hanging limp, his blue eyes wide with horror. And he saw All Might, his mentor, his hero, held captive by a monster born of pure hate. He saw the single drop of blood that trickled from the corner of Tashinori's mouth. And in that moment, all the pain, all the warnings, all the logic vanished. There was only one thought. A thought so pure and so absolute it became a physical force. It was the same thought he'd had when he'd rushed the sludge villain to save Kaken, the same burning imperative he'd felt when he saw Koda falling. I have to save him. The chorus of voices in his head continued to scream. Stop! It's not ready! You'll destroy yourself! He tuned them out. He closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in focus. He reached inward, past the 100% that felt like a governor plate on an engine, past the boundaries the previous users had subconsciously set. He wasn't asking for more power from the quirk. He was digging deeper, to the source. He wasn't just turning the faucet all the way. He was ripping the faucet off the wall and demanding the ocean behind it. His mind screamed a single, silent word that shook the foundations of his soul. More. He felt it. A shift. A deep, tectonic groan from the very core of One for All. It was not a pleasant feeling. It felt like his spirit was being stretched on a rack, pulled in a direction it was never meant to go. The vestiges in his head didn't just scream, they shrieked, a sound of pure, existential agony. He was pulling on the anchor of their very existence, threatening to drag them into an abyss. He pulled harder, ignoring the feeling of his own consciousness beginning to fray at the edges. More, and then, something snapped. It was not a sound that could be heard with the ears. It was a sound that was felt in the bones, in the teeth, in the fabric of space-time itself. For a fraction of a second, the world lost its color, replaced by a stark, monochrome negative. The roar of the fires, the screams, the frantic heartbeat in his own ears, all of it vanished, subsumed by a profound, ringing silence. Then the silence broke. A concussive boom, utterly devoid of heat or fire, erupted from Izuku Midoriya. It was a shockwave of pure force and will. It wasn't an attack. It was an announcement. The ground around him didn't crack. It vaporized, instantly turning into a fine gray dust that was blasted outwards. Bakugo, who had been charging forward, was thrown back like a rag doll, his forward momentum instantly and violently reversed. What the was all he could manage before the air was punched from his lungs. Endeavor, 200 yards away, felt it as a physical blow, a solid wall of pressure that staggered him and extinguished the flames on his left arm. He stared, his professional composure utterly shattered, his jaw slack. What is that? The power that exploded from Izuku wasn't just the familiar green lightning of One for All. It was different. Deeper, an incandescent, blinding emerald light erupted from his chest, so bright it bleached the color from everything around it. But woven through the green, like corrupted data in a perfect code, were writhing, chaotic tendrils of pure black. The light wasn't just on him. It was in him. His body began to glow. Through his torn hero costume, everyone could see it. The green light was tracing his veins, his arteries, his entire circulatory system, turning him into a living, breathing diagram of human anatomy drawn in starfire. His bones shone through his skin, a skeletal silhouette against the brilliant glow. The green lines of full cowl were no longer just dancing on his skin, they had burned their way inside, merging with his very biology. He lifted his head, and the change was terrifying. His eyes were gone. In their place were two solid orbs of pure, glowing emerald, devoid of pupil or iris. They were not the eyes of a boy. They were the eyes of a cosmic event. He pushed himself to his feet. The movement was wrong. It was fluid yet disjointed, like watching a film with missing frames. One moment he was on one knee, the next he was standing, with no discernible motion in between. From Bakugo's perspective, it looked as if three translucent afterimages of Deku resolved into a single, solid form. He wasn't just moving fast. He seemed to be occupying multiple points in space simultaneously. Terminus felt it. For the first time, the creature of logic and adaptation registered an unknown variable. It dropped All Might, who collapsed in a heap, and turned its full attention to the radiant boy. It raised its arms into a defensive posture, its bioarmor thickening, its body tensing to absorb the coming blow. It was preparing for a 100% smash. It was not prepared for what came next. Izuku didn't shout a special move. He didn't even seem to be breathing. He simply moved. To him, the world had slowed to a glacial crawl. The falling embers hung in the air like red stars. He could see the frantic, terrified expression on Bakugo's face, each micro-expression taking an eternity to form. He could see the shock and awe on Endeavor's. He could see the fear in All Might's wide, sunken eyes. And he could see the Noma. But he didn't just see its physical form. He saw more. He saw the tangled mess of stolen quirks that made up its existence, a chaotic knot of energy signatures woven together by All for One's will. He saw the core of its being, the command to destroy, the imperative to adapt. It was all laid bare to his new sight, like a schematic. He took a step. The ground beneath his foot didn't crack. It dissolved into a swirl of emerald and black energy. He appeared before Terminus. There was no sound, no rush of air. One moment he was 20 yards away, the next he was there, his fist cocked back. The energy crackling around his arm was no longer just lightning. It was a churning vortex of green light and black void, a miniature galaxy of destructive potential. He looked at the Nomu, and for the first time, a thought that was not his own, but a convergence of all 9 users speaking as one, echoed in the silent space of his mind. Erase the error. He threw the punch. It connected with the Nomu's chest. The impact was absolute. There was no shockwave, not at first. There was no thunderous boom. There was only a blinding flash of pure, white-green light and a single, high-frequency tone that vibrated through the very air, threatening to shatter bone and consciousness alike. The effect on Terminus was not physical. It was existential. The Nomu did not get pushed back. It did not explode. It began to be unwritten from reality. Its obsidian skin glitched, flickering like a bad hologram. The point of impact was the epicenter of its deletion. Cracks of pure green light spread across its body, not like fractures in stone, but like corrupting codes spreading through a program. The Nomu opened its mouth, but no sound came out. Its expression, if it could be said to have one, was one of utter confusion. It was a being designed to adapt to any physical threat, but this was not a physical attack. This was an attack on its right to exist. Izuku's fist, buried to the wrist in its chest, was a conduit for a force that was rewriting the monster's fundamental nature. The stolen quirks within it were being torn apart, their energies violently unraveling and dissipating into nothingness. Then, the creature began to dissolve. It started with its limbs. Its arms and legs broke down, not into blood and gore, but into motes of shimmering emerald light and flakes of black ash. They drifted upwards like embers from a divine fire, before winking out of existence. The process was silent, beautiful, and utterly horrifying. The dissolution spread to its torso. The being that had shrugged off prominence, burn, and howitzer impact was erased layer by layer, its immense power unraveling into harmless particles. The last thing to go was its head. The featureless faceplate looked at Izuku, and for a fleeting instant, a flicker of red light appeared behind it, a vestige of all for one's will, a spark of the master's rage. Then it too was consumed. The head dissolved, the final particles of light ascending into the smoky sky, and then, there was nothing. Where the 8-foot-tall monstrosity had stood, there was now only empty space. Only then did the physical consequence of the blow manifest. The silent, focused energy of the punch exploded outwards. A delayed shockwave, biblical in its scale, erupted from the point of impact. It was not a wave of fire or force, but of pure spatial distortion. The ground for 50 yards in every direction was instantly vaporized, leaving behind a perfectly smooth, glassy crater that glowed with a faint, residual heat. The ruined buildings surrounding the plaza were not blown apart. They were torn from their foundations and thrown outwards, tumbling end over end for hundreds of feet before crashing back to earth. The shockwave continued, a ring of visible distortion that flattened everything in a full city block. The sound that followed was the sound of a world breaking. A deafening, apocalyptic roar that was felt more than it was heard, a pressure wave that flattened cars, shattered distant windows, and sent heroes and villains alike tumbling. And then, as suddenly as it began, silence fell. A heavy, profound silence, broken only by the distant crackle of fires and the soft hiss of cooling glass. In the center of the newly formed, obsidian crater, Izuku Midoriya stood alone. The incandescent light was beginning to fade, but it was still there, a malevolent aurora pulsing around him. The black tendrils of energy writhed and spat, lashing out at the air before retracting back into his form. The green light in his veins pulsed erratically, in time with a heartbeat that was hammering at an impossible rhythm. He was still standing, his arm outstretched from the punch. He slowly, mechanically, lowered it. He looked down at his own hand. It was glowing, humming with a power that felt alien, invasive. The skin was crisscrossed with fine, hairline cracks from which emerald light seeped, as if he were a porcelain doll filled with captured lightning. This wasn't his power. This wasn't one for all as he knew it. This was something else. Something raw. Something ancient. The faces of the vestiges flashed through his mind, their expressions no longer angry or cautionary, but filled with a shared, soul-shaking terror. They weren't just in his head anymore. He could feel them, their consciousnesses bleeding into his own, their fears becoming his fears. The second user's primal dread. Nana's sorrow. Yoichi's horrified understanding. It was all flooding into him, a tsunami of emotion and memory that threatened to sweep his own identity away. What have I done? The thought was his, and his alone. A tiny island of self in an ocean of overwhelming power. From the edge of the crater, Bakugo pushed himself up, his ears ringing. He stared, his usual crimson rage completely absent from his face, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated shock. He had seen Deku pull off miracles before. This was not a miracle. This was a violation of the laws of nature. Deku. He breathed, the name a question, an accusation, and a plea all at once. Endeavor was frozen, his flames completely extinguished. The number one hero, the man who had striven his entire life to reach the apex of power, was looking at a high school student who had just wielded a force that made his own quirk feel like a child's sparkler. All Might, still on the ground, pushed himself up onto his elbows. He stared at the boy he had chosen, the boy he loved like a son. But what he saw was not the smiling, crying hero in training. He saw a living weapon of mass destruction, a human singularity event. The very thing the vestiges had whispered fears of. The quirk was no longer just being passed on. It was evolving. It was consuming its host. Izuku's gaze lifted from his terrifying hand and swept across the devastation he had wrought. The crater. The flattened buildings. The silence where screams used to be. This wasn't saving people. This was annihilation. He had won. He had saved All Might. But the cost. The solid green of his eyes flickered. For a moment, his own familiar, freckled face was visible beneath the terrifying glow. His expression was one of absolute, soul-shattering horror. He looked at his hands again, not as weapons, but as alien things that had been grafted onto his body. He saw the monster, and the monster was him. The last of the adrenaline, the last of the impossible power, fled his system. It didn't fade, it was ripped away, leaving a vacuum that his body couldn't handle. The glowing lines in his skin went dark. The light in his eyes vanished, revealing his own wide, terrified green irises. A choked gasp escaped his lips. His legs gave out. The world tilted, the bruised sky and the smoking ruins spinning into an incomprehensible blur. His consciousness, stretched to the breaking point and beyond, finally snapped. Izuku Midoriya, the ninth user of One for All, collapsed face first onto the glassy floor of the crater he had created, the silence of his fall swallowed by the immense, terrifying quiet of what he had just unleashed upon the world. The silence in the crater was a living thing, a heavy blanket that smothered all other sound. For what felt like an eternity, nobody moved. The heroes on the periphery, those who had managed to stay on their feet, could only stare at the impossible scene, the glassy, perfectly circular crater, the unbelievable absence of the monster that had brought them to their knees, and the small, still form of Izuku Midoriya lying at its center. It was Katsuki Bakugo who moved first. His body ached, his ears rang with a high-pitched whine, but a primal, instinctual urgency overrode all of it. He stumbled forward, sliding down the shallow, smooth incline of the crater. "Deku?" he growled, the name scraping its way out of his raw throat. As he got closer, the air grew thick, buzzing with a static charge that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. A faint, low hum emanated from the unconscious boy, a sound like a high-voltage transformer. He reached Izuku's side and knelt, his hand hovering over the boy's back. He hesitated. The sight of his rival, the pebble in his shoe that had somehow become a mountain, lying so utterly broken, was disquieting. But it was more than that. He could feel the power still radiating from him, a latent heat that had nothing to do with temperature. Get up, you damn nerd!" he muttered, his voice lacking its usual fire. He finally placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder to shake him. Zzz crack. A bolt of emerald lightning, thick as his thumb, arced from Izuku's body to Bakugo's hand. The shock was immense, locking every muscle in his body for a split second and throwing him back with a strangled yelp. He landed hard on the glassy floor of the crater, his arm tingling numbly, a black, fractal-like burn mark spreading on the palm of his gauntlet. What the hell? He wheezed, staring at his hand and then back at Izuku's still form. Bakugo, stay back! Endeavor's voice boomed from the crater's edge. The number one hero was there, his face a mask of grim concern, flanked by a shell-shocked All Might in his skeletal form. Aizawa had arrived as well, his red-rimmed eyes wide as he surveyed the scene, his capture weapon held at the ready. He's like a live wire, Bakugo grunted, getting to his feet. He's unconscious, but the green shit is still sparking off him. Aizawa's eyes glowed a malevolent red. Erasure! He focused his gaze on Izuku. For a moment, the hum lessened, the static in the air died down. Then Aizawa let out a pained gasp, clutching his head as blood began to well from the corners of his eyes, thicker and faster than usual. I can't hold it, he gritted out, his voice strained. It's not like suppressing a normal quirk. It feels like I'm trying to hold back the ocean with a bucket. There's too much pressure. He was forced to blink. The instant he did, the hum returned to its full intensity, and a fresh wave of static washed over them. All Might staggered forward, his face etched with a terror that was profoundly personal. Midoriya, my boy, he made to step into the crater, but Endeavor put a firm hand on his shoulder. Don't be a fool, Yagi. You saw what happened to Bakugo. The boy is a hazard. The cold, pragmatic assessment struck All Might harder than any punch. A hazard. His successor, the kindest soul he had ever known, was now a danger to be handled with caution. The weight of his decision, made on that rooftop so long ago, pressed down on him with the force of a collapsing star. It took a coordinated effort from 3 heroes with insulation-based quirks and a specialized paramedic gurney designed for electro-quirk users just to move him. Even then, the process was fraught with peril. Every jostle seemed to cause a new discharge of that wild, emerald and black energy. They loaded him onto an armored vehicle, its destination not a hospital, but the most secure place in all of Japan, UA High. The UA infirmary had been transformed. The familiar, comforting room with its soft beds and the scent of antiseptic was gone. In its place was a containment cell. Cementos had worked tirelessly, erecting thick, reinforced concrete walls around bed 3. Leaving only a small, heavily shielded observation window. The usual medical monitors were pushed back to the far wall, their wires running precariously closer to the contained area. None of them worked correctly. The readouts were a chaotic jumble of static and nonsensical peaks, the sensitive electronics overwhelmed by the sheer electromagnetic interference radiating from the room's sole occupant. Inside the gray bunker, Izuku Midoriya lay deathly still. He was stripped of his ruined costume, dressed only in a simple pair of medical shorts. The sight of him was deeply unsettling. His body, though muscular and scarred from 100 battles, was now a canvas for something alien. Faint, glowing green lines, like the cracks in cooling magma, traced paths across his skin. They pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, a slow, steady beat that didn't quite match a human heart. A constant, low hum filled the small space, a bass note of immense, dormant power. Recovery girl, Chio Shizenji, stood outside the shielded window, her face drawn and tired. She had never, in her long and storied career, encountered anything like this. His vitals are an impossibility, she said, her voice tight. She was speaking to All Might and Aizawa, who stood beside her, their reflections grimly superimposed over the image of the boy in the bed. His core body temperature is a stable 100 degrees Celsius. He should be boiling from the inside out, but his cellular structure is perfectly intact. In fact, it seems to be thriving. What about his physical injuries? Aizawa asked, his gaze fixed on Izuku. He was using 100%. His bones should be powder. Chio shook her head, a gesture of pure bewilderment. That's the other thing. I ran a deep tissue scan with the long-range equipment. There are fractures, yes, tens of thousands of them, spiderwebbing through every bone in his body. But they're healing. On their own. The energy he's emitting is acting as some kind of hyper-regenerative agent. It's knitting him back together, but the process is wrong. She pointed a wrinkled finger at the screen displaying a skeletal rendering. Look here. The new bone tissue is denser, laced with some kind of unknown biopolymer. The power didn't just break him, it's rebuilding him into something that can withstand it better. He's a living laboratory, transforming himself at a cellular level. Can you help him? All Might's voice was barely a whisper. Your quirk, can you heal him? Speed up the process? I tried, Chio said, a flicker of professional frustration in her eyes. I had Cementos create a small aperture. I attempted to use my quirk on him from a distance. She held up her hand, showing a faint redness on her palm. The moment my energy made contact with his bioelectric field, it was rejected. Violently. It was like trying to pour water into a volcano. His system is so saturated with this other energy that it recognizes my healing quirk as a foreign contaminant. Trying to heal him directly might kill me, and I suspect it would do him more harm than good. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. I am a healer, Tashinori. My purpose is to mend. But I can't mend this. I don't even know what this is. All I can do is watch and pray his body doesn't tear itself apart. The unspoken fear hung heavy in the air between them, that the boy on the bed was no longer just Izuku Midoriya. He was a vessel, a container for a miracle that had a terrible, unknowable cost. In the common room of the Heights Alliance dormitory, Class 1A sat in stunned silence. The atmosphere, usually buzzing with teenage energy, was thick with a tense, anxious dread. All eyes were fixed on the large television screen, where news channels were playing the same grainy helicopter footage on a loop. The report showed the aftermath in Kamino. The massive, glassy crater. The sheer scale of the destruction surrounding it. And then, the zoomed-in, shaky shot of Izuku, standing in the center of it all, glowing like a vengeful god before he collapsed. The media had already given it a name. The Kamino Singularity. They're saying he erased it. Kaminari whispered, his voice trembling slightly. The Nomu, it didn't explode. It just stopped existing. Is that even possible? The energy readings are off the charts. Yayorozu murmured, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was trying to approach it from a scientific standpoint, but the science simply didn't exist. The output required to vaporize that much mass, let alone, whatever that was, it defies the laws of thermodynamics. It's a paradox. Kirishima stared at the screen, his usual bright optimism replaced by a look of profound awe and fear. It was so manly. He saved everyone. But that light, that wasn't Deku. Nearby, Shoto Todoroki was silent, his heterochromatic eyes fixed on the image of the glowing boy. He thought of his father's flames, the power he had once considered the pinnacle of destructive force. What he had just witnessed on screen dwarfed it. It made Prominence Burn look like a flickering candle. This wasn't about being the number one hero anymore. Midoriya had accessed a plane of power that Todoroki hadn't even known existed. It was humbling and utterly terrifying. In a quiet corner, away from the others, Katsuki Bakugo leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. He wasn't watching the TV. He was staring at the palm of his right hand, where the faint outline of the burn from Izuku's static discharge was still visible through his glove. He had been there. He had felt it. The pressure in the air, the silent snap, the way Deku had moved as if the rules of time and space were mere suggestions. He had seen the look in his eyes, those solid green orbs of cosmic power. That wasn't the face of the useless, crying Deku he had tormented for years. It wasn't even the face of the determined rival who had pushed him to be better. It was the face of something else entirely. Something ancient and terrifying. For the first time since he was 4 years old, Katsuki Bakugo felt a fear that had nothing to do with his own safety. He was afraid of someone, and the fact that this someone was Deku had shattered his worldview into a million pieces. He wasn't silent because he was angry or brooding. He was silent because he had no words for the magnitude of what he had witnessed. His entire concept of power, of limits, had been rendered obsolete in a single, silent flash of green light. Achiko Uraraka couldn't sit still. The worried chatter of her classmates was just white noise. She had slipped away, her feet carrying her on autopilot towards the infirmary. She needed to see him. She found the hallway guarded, but a pleading look to Aizawa, who stood watched like a stone gargoyle, granted her access. She stepped into the main infirmary, her breath catching at the sight of the concrete bunker. It looked like a tomb. She walked to the shielded window, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. and there he was. Lying so still, the only movement the soft, eerie pulse of the green lines on his skin. He looked both familiar and terrifyingly alien. This was the boy who had saved her during the entrance exam, the boy who blushed and stammered, the boy whose determination inspired her every single day. But he was also the source of the oppressive energy that made the air in the room feel heavy and hard to breathe. Her hand rose, pressing against the cool, reinforced glass of the window. Tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to reach out, to hold his hand, to tell him it was okay. But a deep, primal instinct held her back. The memory of Bakugo being thrown back by a simple touch was fresh in her mind. What would that power, even dormant, do to her? Would it simply push her away? Or would her quirk, zero gravity, react in some horrible, unpredictable way? She was afraid to touch him. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, and a sob escaped her lips. She was afraid of the person she cared for most. He forced it, All Might said, his voice ragged. He, Aizawa, and Recovery Girl had retreated to a small, private consultation room, the air thick with unspoken fear. He held a tablet displaying notes he had made years ago, notes from the vestiges themselves. He forced the singularity. Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Singularity? That sounds like something out of a science fiction novel, not a quirk assessment. It's a theory, All Might explained, his skeletal fingers trembling as he scrolled through the text. A fear, really. Passed down from the previous users. One for all is unique. It doesn't just transfer power, it stockpiles it. But it also stockpiles the life force, the consciousness, of each user. And it accumulates the quirks of those who had one. He looked up, his eyes meeting Aizawa's. The theory was that a quirk, when passed down and cultivated over generations, would eventually reach a point of such immense power and complexity that it would cross a threshold. A singularity point. It would stop being a quirk in the conventional sense and become something else, a law of nature unto itself. Uncontrollable, overwhelmingly powerful, and dangerous to the user and everyone around them. The vestiges, especially the second and third, who lived in an era of raw, untamed power, were terrified of it. They believed it would burn the user out from the inside, a star-going supernova. And you believe Midoriya just triggered that? Aizawa asked, his expression grim. He didn't just use 100% Aizawa. All Might insisted, his voice cracking with emotion. I know what 100% feels like. It's the peak of a mountain. What we saw, what he didn't climb the mountain, he detonated it. He ripped open the core of the quirk and let out the raw, unfiltered power that has been accumulating for over a century. He didn't just borrow power from the vestiges, he siphoned it from their very souls. Recovery Girl, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. It explains what I'm seeing. His body isn't just healing, it's being rewritten. The quirk is no longer a tool he wields. It's becoming a part of his fundamental biology. It's changing him to be a better container for itself. A terrible silence descended on the room. The implications were staggering. Izuku hadn't just broken his limits, he had broken the quirk itself. He had become the walking, breathing embodiment of a doomsday theory. So what do we do? Aizawa asked, cutting to the heart of the matter with his usual bluntness. We have a student who is a living nuclear reactor, who can't be healed, who can't be touched, and who, upon waking, might level the entire school by accident. What is the protocol for that, All Might? All Might had no answer. He could only stare at his shaking hands, the hands that had passed on this terrible, magnificent burden. For the first time, he truly understood the weight of what he had done. He had not given Izuku a chance to be a hero. He had cursed him. Inside Izuku Midoriya's mind, there was no peace. The calm, orderly boardroom where he usually met the vestiges was gone. In its place was a tempest. He was adrift in a chaotic storm of emerald and black energy, a swirling vortex of raw power. The voices of the past users were no longer distinct whispers or clear sentences. They were a constant, overlapping cacophony, 1,000 conversations happening at once. So much power, it hurts, Nana Shimura's pained whisper. The structure is compromised, the integrity is gone. Daigoro Banjo's frantic analysis. Told him. We told him not to pull on the root. The second user's furious, guttural roar. It's loose! Oh God, it's loose! Yoichi's voice, filled with the primal, creator's terror. Fragments of their lives flashed through his consciousness, not as clear visions, but as raw, emotional data. He felt Nana's despair as she faced All for One. He felt the Third's grim determination in a forgotten war. He felt Hikichinamori's loneliness as he hid from the world, his body cracking under the strain of the quirk. He felt it all at once, their fears, their hopes, their pain, all mixing with his own until he could no longer tell where he ended and they began. He was drowning in 8 other lifetimes. But through the storm, through the screaming chaos, he heard a single, faint sound from the outside. A soft, gentle voice, laced with worry. Deku, please wake up, Uraraka. The name was an anchor. A point of light in the overwhelming darkness. He reached for it, his consciousness coalescing around that single, familiar sound. He fought his way up through the layers of noise, through the storm of power and memory, clawing his way back to the surface, back to his own body. With a gasp that felt like he was breathing for the first time, Izuku Midoriya's eyes snapped open, and he screamed. It was a raw, animalistic sound of pure, undiluted agony. The world that rushed in to greet him was not the world he had left. It was a nightmare of sensory overload. The quiet hum of the room was a deafening roar in his ears. He could hear everything. The frantic thumping of Uraraka's heart outside the window, the steady, rhythmic pulse of Aizawa's blood through his veins down the hall. The whisper of the air conditioning vents 3 floors above him. The frantic clicking of a keyboard in Nisa's office. A million sounds, all crashing into him at once with equal, unbearable volume. But the sight was worse. The world was no longer made of solid objects. It was made of energy. He saw the dull, gray, stable energy of the concrete walls. He saw the frantic, buzzing yellow energy of the electrical wiring within them. He looked down at his own body and saw the terrifying green light still pulsing in his veins, a contained inferno. He scrambled upright in the bed, his breath coming in ragged, panicked bursts. His eyes darted around the room, trying to make sense of the overwhelming flood of information. He could see the quirks. He could see them as clear as day. He saw the residual energy of Cementous's quirk in the walls, a flowing pattern like sedimentary rock. He saw the ghost of Recovery Girl's quirk, a faint, warm pinkish glow lingering in the air near his bed, a stark contrast to the violent green of his own aura. The door to the consultation room burst open. All Might, Aizawa, and Recovery Girl rushed out, alerted by his scream. He saw them, and the sight made him recoil. Recovery Girl was surrounded by a soft, gentle aura of life-giving energy. All Might was a flickering candle, the last embers of one for all, a faint blue echo within his chest, almost completely extinguished. And Aizawa was terrifying. His quirk wasn't a glow. It was a void. A swirling, hungry vortex of absolute nothingness centered behind his eyes. It was a patch of anti-existence, a power that didn't add to the world, but took away. When Aizawa's gaze met his, Izuku felt a physical pull, as if that void wanted to consume the light roaring inside him. Midoriya! Are you alright? Aizawa's voice was just another sound in the cacophony, but his intent was clear. Outside the window, Uraraka pressed closer, her face a picture of alarm and concern. Deku-kun! Her voice, his anchor. He turned his head, his wide, terrified eyes finding hers, and his world broke all over again. He didn't just see Uraraka, his friend, the girl with the kind eyes and rosy cheeks. He saw her quirk. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly alien. A swirling, vibrant pink nebula of soft light was wrapped around her hands and feet. It wasn't static. It was constantly in motion, a miniature galaxy of gently rotating energy that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. It pulsed with a quiet, steady rhythm, an energy that sought to unburden, to release, to make things weightless. He could feel its conceptual purpose, to negate the pull of the earth. He was seeing the soul of her power. The raw stuff of creation that gave her a gift that others called a quirk. The beauty of it was overwhelmed by the terrifying implications. He wasn't seeing his friend. He was seeing a walking, talking cosmic anomaly. Just like him. The connection between the girl and the power was too much to process. The last vestiges of his sanity frayed. This new sight was a curse. It stripped away the familiar, replacing it with a horrifying, energetic truth. A guttural sound of fear escaped his throat. He scrambled backwards on the bed, trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and the window, between himself and the girl who was now a swirling pink galaxy. He pressed himself against the cold, hard concrete of the back wall, his whole body trembling, the green light in his veins flaring with his panic. He looked from his own glowing hands to the impossible sight of Uraraka's quirk, his mind unable to bridge the gap. "I can see it," he croaked, his voice raw with terror and disbelief. He stared wildly at Aizawa's void, at All Might's flickering ember, at Uraraka's nebula. "I can see it all." His gaze locked with Uraraka's horrified, confused eyes, and he screamed the words that confirmed their worst fears. "I can see everything!" The scream tore from Izuku's lungs, a ragged, desperate sound swallowed by the overwhelming sensory data flooding his brain. The world was a symphony of horrors, and he was the unwilling conductor. He could see the beautiful, terrifying pink nebula of Uraraka's quirk swirling around her hands, a sight so alien and profound it felt like looking upon the face of God and going mad. He could see the hungry void behind Aizawa's eyes, a patch of anti-reality that promised only oblivion. He could see the dying blue ember in All Might's chest, a flickering star about to go cold. "I can see everything!" The words were a plea for it to stop. He scrambled back, the rough texture of the reinforced concrete a minor, grounding sensation in a world that had lost all its grounding. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the roaring orchestra of a million other sounds. He could hear the frantic spike in Uraraka's pulse, the subtle shift of Aizawa's weight, the dry, rasping intake of All Might's breath. It was too much. It was all too much. He squeezed his eyes shut, but it did no good. The images were burned onto the backs of his eyelids, the energy signatures of the world a permanent, searing afterimage. The sound was worse. It burrowed into his skull, a million tiny drills of information, none of it wanted. "Stop. Please, just make it stop." His mind, stretched taut like a drumskin, finally broke. He was seeking an escape, a refuge from the unbearable onslaught of reality. His consciousness, unable to find peace in the physical world, retreated. It plunged inward, seeking the only other space it knew. The transition was not gentle. It was a violent tearing. The image of the infirmary, the concerned faces, the oppressive concrete walls, it all dissolved, not into darkness, but into a blinding, deafening maelstrom of pure, unadulterated energy. He was no longer in his body. He was adrift. This was not the calm, dark, misty boardroom he had come to know as the vestige world. That place of quiet contemplation was gone, obliterated. In its place was the source of his agony. He was floating in the heart of the storm itself, a roiling, churning tempest of emerald and black. Rivers of incandescent green light, vast and powerful as solar flares, flowed around him. Woven through them were abyssal tendrils of blackness, colder than the vacuum of space, that seemed to absorb all light and hope. The pressure was immense, a physical weight that threatened to crush his very essence. The sound was a continuous, deafening roar, the sound of a star being born and dying in the same instant. He felt like a single drop of water in the middle of a hurricane, utterly insignificant, and about to be torn apart. He tried to call out, but he had no mouth. He tried to swim, but he had no limbs. He was just a point of awareness, a terrified thought about to be extinguished by the sheer magnitude of the power he had unleashed. "This is it," he thought, a wave of despair washing over him. "This is what I did. I broke it. I broke everything." Then, through the chaos, he saw them. They were like lighthouses in the storm. 9 points of light, though one of them, his own, was faint and flickering. The other 8 shone with varying intensity, acting as anchors in the raging sea of energy. They were the vestiges, but not as he had ever seen them before. They weren't just standing there. They were struggling. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first, stood with his arms outstretched, faint lines of light connecting him to the others. He looked strained, his jaw tight, his usually gentle face a mask of intense concentration. He was the center of their formation, the linchpin holding them all together against the storm. Nana Shimura was beside him, her black bodysuit flickering as torrents of green energy washed over her. She had one hand on Yoichi's shoulder, the other held out as if to ward off the chaos. Her expression was one of profound sorrow. Daigoro Banjo, Lariat, was a frantic ball of energy. He was gesturing wildly, shouting words that were ripped away by the roar, his own black whip quirk manifesting not as controlled tendrils, but as unstable, lashing arcs of shadow that were being consumed by the greater darkness in the storm. And then there were the second and third. They were pure fury. They stood back to back, their forms more solid, more defined than the others, as if their rage gave them substance. They weren't just anchoring themselves. They were actively fighting the storm, pushing back against the currents of power with sheer, indomitable will. Their faces, usually obscured, were partially visible now, illuminated by the violent light. They were hard, scarred men from a harder, more brutal time. A colossal wave of emerald energy, larger than the rest, surged towards Izuku's fragile consciousness. He braced for annihilation, but before it could hit him, a figure materialized in its path. It was the second user. He didn't speak. He simply snarled, a sound that cut through the roar of the storm, and through a punch. The impact of his fist against the wave of energy created a shockwave that rippled through the mindscape, diverting the torrent around them. The second turned his head, his eyes burning with cold, incandescent fury. The glare he fixed on Izuku was more terrifying than any physical blow. "You idiot!" His voice was not spoken, it was projected, a jagged shard of pure rage hammered directly into Izuku's mind. "You absolute, arrogant fool! Do you have any conception of what you have done? We warned you!" The third user's voice joined in, a low, rumbling growl like an earthquake. "We screamed at you. The dam was cracking and you took a sledgehammer to it. I had to save him." Izuku projected back, his thought voice weak and trembling. "The Noma! All Might, save him?" The second roared, advancing on Izuku, his form crackling with barely contained power. "You think this is saving anyone? You haven't just endangered yourself. You've endangered everyone. You've turned this power, our legacy, into an unguided missile. Enough." The voice of Yoichi Shigaraki, the first, was not loud, but it cut through the rage and the storm with an authority that could not be denied. It was calm, weary, and ancient. The second user stopped, though the fury still radiated from him in palpable waves. Yoichi's spectral form drifted closer to Izuku. His face, thin and kind, was etched with a deep, bone-weary sadness. He looked like a father gazing upon a beloved son who had made a catastrophic, irreversible mistake. "Look around you," ninth Yoichi projected, his mental voice a soothing balm after the second's jagged rage. "This is the consequence. This is one for all." "No!" Izuku thought back, his consciousness swirling with confusion. "This isn't. One for all is the embers, the torches, it's a power to save." "That is the story we tell ourselves, the shape we give the power," Yoichi corrected gently. "It is a necessary fiction. For generations, we have treated one for all like a cup of water, carefully passed from one hand to the next, each user adding a little more to the cup. What you did not simply add to it. You went back to the wellspring, to the source from which all the water flows, and you broke it open." He gestured to the roiling chaos around them. "This is the truth of our quirk. It is not a cup of water. It is a reservoir, a vast ocean of stockpiled energy and will, built over a century. And our bodies, our consciousnesses, they are the dam, holding it all back, allowing only a trickle to be used safely." Yoichi's form drifted until he was directly in front of Izuku, his translucent eyes filled with a profound gravity. "You were at 100%. You were at the absolute limit of what the dam was designed to release, but you demanded more. You didn't just open the floodgates, Izuku. You blew a hole in the dam wall." The metaphor crashed into Izuku with the force of truth. The sensory overload, the uncontrollable power, the altered mindscape, it all clicked into place. "The power you used against that Nomu, the power that is even now rewriting your physical body, is not the surface-level energy we have all wielded," Yoichi continued. "It is the raw, conceptual power from the core of the reservoir itself. An endless, overflowing wellspring that is now pouring out into the world, with your body as the ruptured gateway. You have forced a singularity event. A wave of nausea, a mental sickness, washed over Izuku. I can't control it. Of course you can't control it. Daigoro Banjo, the fifth user, zipped over, his usual boisterous energy replaced with frantic anxiety. Kid, you don't get it. You're not using the quirks anymore. The flood is rushing through you, and our quirks are caught in the current. It's like they've been overclocked. He held up his hands, and the shadows of Black Whip writhed around them, thicker and more violent than ever before. My quirk is an extension of my emotions. But now, it's tapped into the main power line. When you feel something, it doesn't just want to create a few whips. It wants to manifest a forest, a storm of living shadow. Trying to use Black Whip now isn't like cracking a whip. It's like trying to tame a kraken. And the sixth user materialized beside him, his long hair seeming to bleed into the shadows of the storm. My smokescreen is the same. It was meant for misdirection, a little puff of cover. Now, the power flowing through it could blot out the sun. And your sensory overload, that's part of it too. One for All has always enhanced the senses, but now that the core is exposed, you are connected to everything. You're not just seeing people, you are seeing the very energy of their existence, the essence of their quirks. It is a sight we were never meant to witness. Izuku's mind reeled. So the beautiful, terrifying nebula around Uraraka, that was real. A sight hidden from mortal eyes that he could now perceive. It was a horrifying, lonely revelation. Nana Shimura drifted forward, her expression so full of pity and sorrow that it made Izuku's core ache. She placed a spectral hand on his shoulder, and for a moment, he felt a flicker of warmth and comfort in the cold, raging storm. My float, her thought voice was soft, trembling. It was simple. It let me hang in the air, leap from place to place. Now, with the flood pouring through it, it's not about just making myself lighter. It's about manipulating the principle of gravity itself. You could create localized wells of immense gravity or fields of absolute weightlessness. You could tear a building apart by changing its gravitational constant. She looked at him, her eyes mirroring the tears he couldn't shed. You have the power of a god, Izuku. And the body of a boy. This was it. The final piece of the puzzle. The price. He could feel the dread coiling in the pit of his non-existent stomach. Yoichi is right, Nana said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Your body is the gateway. And the gateway is breaking. That power, the raw energy of the core, it is not meant for a physical vessel. It's too pure, too potent. Every second it flows through you, it erodes you. Erodes me? Izuku asked, the thought laced with fear. It burns you from the inside out, Nana confirmed, her voice cracking. The reason you aren't dead, the reason your bones are knitting themselves back together, is because the power is also rebuilding you. But it is not a perfect process. It is a frantic, desperate repair job. She held up her spectral hands. Think of your body as a precious ceramic bowl. You have shattered it. The power is now seeping into the cracks, forcing the pieces back together not with glue, but with molten light. It is holding you together, but you are no longer just made of clay. You are part clay, part light. This is what you saw on your skin. Those glowing lines. They are the scars of your own power, the evidence of its repair. The kintsugi metaphor, beautiful and terrible, locked into place. He wasn't healing. He was being replaced. Every time you tap into that overflow state, as you did against the Nomu, Nana continued, her voice heavy with the weight of his sentence, you will shatter yourself more. And each time, the power will fill in more of the cracks. More of you will be eroded away, replaced by the raw energy of One for All. Your body, your mind, even your soul, you will become less Izuku Midoriya and more One for All. She hesitated, the next words clearly causing her immense pain to say. If you continue to push, to use that overflow, you will eventually shatter completely. You will be so thoroughly replaced by the power that there will be nothing of yourself left. You will burn yourself out of existence, becoming nothing more than a momentary, brilliant flash of light. A memory, a ninth anchor in this storm for whoever comes next, if a next is even possible. The finality of her words was absolute. It wasn't a risk. It was a certainty. He had traded his life, his very identity, for a single moment of impossible power. He had saved All Might from a monster, only to become a different kind of monster himself. A walking, talking time bomb, his own body the fuse. And worse, the line between his mind and theirs was thinning. He could feel their emotions bleeding into his own. Nana's sorrow was a lead weight in his chest. The second's fury was a hot coal in his gut. Yoichi's ancient weariness settled on his shoulders. He was becoming a composite being, his own personality just one voice in a growing choir. The vestige world, once a source of guidance, had become a prison. A roaring, chaotic cell where he was trapped with his own power and the ghosts of his predecessors, slowly losing himself to both. He was Izuku Midoriya. He was the ninth. And he was already fading. The hell are you staring at? The voice was not a mental projection. It was real. It was loud, angry, and achingly familiar. It was the sound of grinding gravel and explosions. Kaken. The sound was a lifeline, a rope thrown from the real world into his psychic prison. It cut through the roar of the storm, through the chorus of the vestiges. With a gasp, Izuku's consciousness was violently yanked back, pulled from the heart of the tempest, and slammed back into his own body. His eyes snapped open. The sensory overload was still there, but it was muted, the volume turned down from 100 to a 10. The horror of his revelations in the mindscape was so profound that the chaotic reality of the infirmary now seemed almost manageable. He was sitting up on the bed, his back against the wall. The green lines on his skin were pulsing with a soft, innocuous light. All Might, Aizawa, and Recovery Girl were standing a few feet away, their faces a mixture of fear and concern. Uraraka was still at the window, her hands pressed to the glass, tears streaming down her face. And standing in the doorway to the concrete room, having just burst in, was Katsuki Bakugo. His face was a thundercloud of rage, frustration, and something else, something that looked like fear. He had clearly bypassed Aizawa and stormed in, his patience completely gone. "I asked you a question, you damn nerd!" Bakugo snarled, stalking towards the bed. "All that light and shit! The news is calling it a singularity! What did you do to yourself?" "Bakugo, stop!" Aizawa commanded, taking a step forward. But Bakugo ignored him. He was focused entirely on Izuku, his eyes wild. This wasn't just his typical rage. This was the desperate anger of someone whose entire world had been upended, who was demanding an explanation from the person who had upended it. "Kaken, you can't be in here!" Izuku stammered, his voice hoarse. He tried to shrink back, acutely aware of the humming power still radiating from his skin. "It's not safe. I'll decide what's safe!" Bakugo roared. He closed the remaining distance in 2 quick strides and did the one thing Izuku was terrified of. He reached out and grabbed him. His hand clamped down on the collar of Izuku's medical scrubs, yanking him forward. "You're going to tell me what's going on, right now! No more secrets, no more mumbling! I saw what you did! I felt it!" What was that? The physical contact was a lit fuse. The moment Bakugo's skin touched the fabric over Izuku's chest, the dormant power within him reacted. It was not a conscious act. It was not an attack. It was a purely defensive, biological reflex, like a sea anemone stinging a perceived threat. Izuku's eyes, which had returned to their normal green, flashed. For a single, terrifying instant, they became those solid orbs of incandescent emerald light once more. A pulse of raw, colorless energy, visible only as a ripple in the air like heat haze, erupted from Izuku's chest. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't force. It was something else, something more fundamental. It felt like a wave of pure rejection. The effect on Bakugo was immediate and violent. He didn't feel a punch or a shock. He felt as though the space his body occupied was suddenly and violently repelled by the space Izuku's body occupied. His hand was blasted off Izuku's collar. His feet left the floor. He was thrown backwards, not as if pushed, but as if the spot where he stood had ceased to welcome him. He sailed through the air, his eyes wide with shock, and crashed into the far concrete wall with a sickening thud that echoed in the small room. He slumped to the ground, the air knocked from his lungs, conscious but completely stunned, his mind unable to process what had just happened. Silence descended. Aizawa was frozen mid-stride, his capture weapon half unfurled. All Might's jaw was slack, his skeletal frame trembling. Uraraka let out a horrified gasp from behind the glass. Izuku stared, his own body shaking uncontrollably. He hadn't moved a muscle. He hadn't flexed, he hadn't activated a quirk, he hadn't even thought about hurting him. He had done nothing, and he had still sent his oldest friend, his rival, flying across the room with enough force to have seriously injured a normal person. The glowing lines on his skin flared brighter for a moment, then dimmed again. He slowly looked down at his own hands, then back at Bakugo's slumped form against the wall. The vestiges had been right. The power was a part of him now. An uncontrollable, reflexive part. The horror of his new reality crashed down on him with its full, devastating weight. He wasn't just a danger when he tried to be a hero. He was a danger simply by existing. He looked at Bakugo, then at the terrified faces of his teachers and friend. The kintsugi bowl was shattered, and the light leaking from its cracks was burning everyone he cared about. The silence in the concrete room was thick with the ozone stench of raw power and the metallic tang of fear. Bakugo lay slumped against the far wall, conscious but dazed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He wasn't seriously injured, a testament to his own resilience, but he was profoundly shaken. The experience was nothing like being hit. There had been no impact, no kinetic force he could recognize. It was as if reality itself had picked him up and thrown him aside. Izuku was trembling, his eyes wide with a horror that eclipsed anything he had ever felt on a battlefield. He had hurt Kaken. He had hurt him without moving, without thinking, without even a flicker of intent. The power had acted on its own, a venomous reflex he didn't know he possessed. The memory of the second user's fury, of Nana Shimura's tearful warning, echoed in the ruin of his mind. It erodes you. It replaces you. Aizawa was the first to react, his professionalism overriding his shock. He did a quick check on Bakugo, his hand briefly resting on the boy's neck to check his pulse. "He's fine," he announced, his voice tight and low. "Winded but fine." Bakugo pushed Aizawa's hand away, snarling, though it lacked its usual force. "I'm not made of glass." He pushed himself into a sitting position, his glare fixed on Izuku, but the anger in his eyes was diluted by a dawning, terrifying understanding. He hadn't been attacked. He had been rejected. By the very space Deku occupied. All Might moved towards Izuku, his hand outstretched in a gesture of comfort. "My boy, it's all right. It was an accident. Don't!" Izuku's voice was a choked cry. He scrambled back on the bed, pressing himself into the corner as if he could merge with the concrete. The green lines on his skin, which had dimmed, flared with his panic. "Don't come near me." The plea was so full of genuine terror that All Might stopped dead, his outstretched hand falling to his side. The sight of his successor, the boy who had always looked at him with such adoration, now cowering from him as if he were the monster, was a physical blow. "He needs space," Aizawa said, his voice firm. He turned to Bakugo. "Out. Now." For once, Bakugo didn't argue. He got to his feet, wincing, and stalked out of the room, throwing one last, complicated look at Izuku before disappearing from view. The door was sealed. The fragile moment of connection, however violent, was over. Izuku was alone again with his fear and the unshakable truth of his condition. He was a contagion. A walking disaster area. Later, in the sterile confines of Principal Nise's office, the gravity of the situation settled like a shroud. The principal, a chimera of intellect and animal instinct, sat behind his desk, his paws steepled before him. His usual cheerful demeanor was gone, replaced by an expression of intense, analytical gravity. A large monitor beside him displayed a loop of the security footage from the infirmary, the flicker of light, the ripple in the air, Bakugo being thrown back without physical cause. "A reflexive, non-physical, spatial repulsion," Nise murmured, his whiskers twitching. "The energy did not strike him, it warped the space he occupied." "Fascinating. And absolutely terrifying. He can't control it, Nizu," All Might said, pacing the floor. "He's terrified of himself. We can't just leave him locked in that room. It's a prison, it is a quarantine," Aizawa corrected, his arms crossed. His eyes were still bloodshot from his earlier attempt at erasure. "And a necessary one until we understand the nature of the threat. Right now, Midoriya is the single most dangerous individual on this campus, perhaps in this country. And he is dangerous to himself most of all." Nisa's gaze shifted from the screen to the two men. Fear and isolation will only exacerbate the problem. A quirk, especially one tied so deeply to the user's emotional state, cannot be mastered through confinement. It must be understood. We need data. Data? All Might stopped pacing. You want to run tests? After what just happened? Precisely because of what just happened. Nisa countered, his black eyes glinting. We know the what. We have a catastrophic, uncontrolled overflow of power. We do not know the how or the why. What are the triggers? Is it purely reflexive, or can it be consciously activated? What is the baseline of his energy emissions? Can it be moderated? Can it be vented safely? These are questions we must answer, for his sake and for everyone else's. Aizawa nodded slowly, the grim logic appealing to his pragmatic nature. A controlled environment. Maximum distance. We need to know what we're dealing with. It's too dangerous. All Might insisted. He's just a boy. He's breaking under the strain. He is a boy who just erased a High-End Nomu from existence and flattened a city block as an after effect. Aizawa stated bluntly. The time for treating him with kid gloves is over, Tashinori. He is no longer just your successor. He is a force of nature. And if we don't teach him how to direct the storm, it will swallow him and everything around him. The plan was formed out of grim necessity. A test. Not of strength, but of control. A diagnostic session to probe the edges of this new, terrifying power. They would use Training Ground Gamma, the massive industrial complex. It was the largest and most isolated of UA's facilities, designed for large-scale rescue simulations and battles against giant robots. Its towers and pipelines could be rebuilt. Human lives could not. When they told Izuku, he refused. No, he whispered, his face pale, his eyes darting around the small concrete room. I won't. I can't. I hurt Kaken. I could have killed him. I'm not going out there. I'm not using this power, ever again. It was Bakugo who changed his mind. He appeared at the shielded window of the infirmary late that night, long after everyone else had gone. He didn't shout. He didn't taunt. He just stood there, staring in at Izuku, who was huddled on his bed. So this is it, huh? Bakugo's voice was low, devoid of its usual explosive crackle. You get a big, scary power-up, and now you're going to sit in a box for the rest of your life, feeling sorry for yourself? Izuku didn't answer. He just squeezed his eyes shut. Pathetic, Bakugo scoffed. You finally get strong. Stronger than me. Stronger than anyone. And you're too much of a damn coward to even face it. It's not like your quirk, Kaken. Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. I can't control it. It hurts people. So? Bakugo slammed his fist against the reinforced glass, making Izuku flinch violently. So you learn. You think I was born knowing how to make an AP shot? You think Endeavor didn't burn down a few forests learning how to control his damn fire? Power is a beast, Deku. You either learn to ride it, or it eats you alive. Hiding from it won't make it go away. He leaned closer to the glass, his red eyes burning with an intensity that pierced through Izuku's fog of despair. What you did to me in here, that scared the shit out of me. But you know what's more terrifying? The idea of you, with all that power, rotting away in a cell because you're too afraid to even try. You think the villains are going to wait for you to feel better? You think All for One's cronies are just going to give up? Bakugo's words were harsh, brutal, but they were not cruel. They were a challenge. A gauntlet thrown down. Stop crying about being a nuke, he growled. And learn how to fucking aim. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Izuku alone with the ringing truth of his words. Hiding wouldn't work. The power was a part of him. He could either be its prisoner or its master. And as terrifying as the second option was, the first was simply unacceptable. Training Ground Gamma looked less like a school facility and more like a military test site. A sprawling complex of concrete cooling towers, tangled pipelines, and vast, empty plazas stretched out under a gray, overcast sky. The air was cold, carrying the metallic scent of industry. The perimeter was secured. Cementos, power loader in a custom-built radiation suit, and a fully equipped medical team including recovery girl were stationed over half a mile away in a reinforced bunker, watching on monitors. In the center of the largest plaza stood 3 figures. All Might, looking smaller and more frail than ever against the industrial backdrop. Aizawa, stoic and alert, his capture weapon draped loosely around his neck. And Izuku, he wore a simple, loose-fitting training uniform. The green lines on his skin were visible even through the fabric, pulsing with a slow, ominous rhythm. He was trembling, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide. "All right, problem child." Aizawa's voice was calm, steady. "The objective today is simple. We are not testing your strength. We are testing your control. We are going to start with the absolute minimum, the first technique you ever mastered." Izuku knew what he meant. "Full cowl, at 5%, exactly," Aizawa confirmed. "I want you to activate it, hold it for 3 seconds, and then release it. That's all. All Might and I are here as observers and if necessary a safety measure. I will be ready with erasure. Do you understand?" Izuku nodded, swallowing hard. It sounded so simple. 5% was second nature to him now. It was a gentle warmth, a comfortable hum of power he used to walk down the street. But he hadn't touched the power since the battle. He hadn't dared. He remembered what Yoichi had said in the storm. You blew a hole in the damn wall. He wasn't just turning on a tap anymore. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of his heart. He closed his eyes and reached inward. The familiar, welcoming warmth of One for All was gone. In its place was the raging, chaotic storm of the vestige world. He was standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into a hurricane of emerald and black. The roar was deafening in his mind. He could feel the vestiges, their collective panic, a cold knot in his stomach. "Just a little," he pleaded with the storm. "Just 5%. A single cupful," he focused, visualizing the gentle green lightning of his old full cowl. He imagined pulling just a tiny thread of energy from the raging tempest, just enough to coat his skin. He reached out his metaphysical hand and touched the storm. The result was instantaneous and absolute. The storm did not give him a thread. The moment he made contact, the hurricane surged up to meet him. The concept of 5% was meaningless. It was like trying to scoop a cup of water from a tsunami. The waves simply swallowed the cup and the hand holding it. A choked gasp escaped Izuku's lips. His eyes snapped open. They were glowing. The world went silent for a moment, and then the hum returned, 100 times louder, a deep, resonant roar that vibrated in the teeth. The soft green lines on his skin exploded into incandescent arteries of brilliant emerald light, interwoven with the terrifying, writhing blackness of the void. The overflow state had returned. He hadn't even moved, but the ground beneath his feet couldn't withstand his mere presence. The concrete cracked, then shattered, spiderwebbing outwards for 20 feet. The air around him shimmered and distorted with heatless energy. "Midoriya, release it!" Aizawa yelled, his hand already reaching for his goggles. "I can't!" Izuku cried out, his voice distorted, layered with a faint, multi-toned echo, the voices of the vestiges bleeding through. "It's not listening!" Panic seized him. This wasn't him. This overwhelming power, this aura of destruction, it was an invader wearing his skin. He needed to stop it. He needed to control it. His frantic thoughts latched onto the first quirk he could think of, a tool he had painstakingly mastered. Black Whip. It was the wrong thing to do. If trying to access the core power was opening the floodgates, trying to use a specific quirk was like attaching a fire hose to the opening. The familiar black tendrils he was used to did not appear. Instead, the black energy that was already writhing around his body exploded outwards from his back and arms. It wasn't a whip, it was a detonation of living shadow. Dozens of colossal, thick tendrils, some as wide as tree trunks, erupted from him. They were not controlled. They were wild, lashing out with furious, destructive intent, driven by his own panic. One of the massive tendrils, moving faster than the eye could follow, whipped sideways and struck one of Training Ground Gamma's largest structures, a 200-foot-tall concrete cooling tower. The impact was devastating. The tendril didn't just hit the tower, it wrapped around it, and with a monstrous flex of power, it squeezed. Concrete groaned, twisted, and then exploded. The entire upper half of the tower crumbled, collapsing in on itself in a monstrous cloud of dust and debris. Izuku stared in horror at the destruction he had wrought with a single, panicked thought. The sight of the collapsing tower, the proof of his monstrous power, only fed his fear. He had to get away. He had to stop this. He pulled on another quirk, a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control. Float. He didn't rise. Nana Shimura's words from the storm came back to him, a prophetic, terrible curse. It's not about just making myself lighter. It's about manipulating the principle of gravity itself. The air around him warped. A low, gut-wrenching groaning sound filled the plaza as the very laws of physics were bent to his panicked will. He hadn't created a field of weightlessness. He had created its opposite. He had created a gravity well. The shattered concrete at his feet was pulverized into dust and sucked inwards towards him. Small rocks and pebbles lifted from the ground, spiraling around his legs. The cloud of dust from the collapsed tower, which had been drifting on the wind, suddenly changed direction, pulled towards him as if he were a miniature black hole. The air pressure plummeted, and a swirling vortex of wind and debris began to form with him at its center. All Might, who had been standing 100 yards away, felt a sudden, inexplicable pull. His feet slid forward on the pavement. He had to brace himself to keep from being dragged towards his successor. "Aizawa now!" he bellowed. Aizawa didn't need to be told. His goggles were already on, his hair floating, his eyes burning with a crimson light. Erasure! The world snapped back into focus. The instant Aizawa's quirk made contact, the connection between Izuku and the raging storm in his soul was severed. The incandescent light vanished. The gravity well collapsed. The swirling debris fell to the ground with a deafening clatter. The black tendrils dissolved into nothingness. Izuku fell to his knees in the center of the fresh crater, gasping, the phantom sensation of immense power leaving an aching void in its wake. But the relief was short-lived. A pained, choked sound came from Aizawa. Izuku looked up. His teacher was trembling, his fists clenched, his entire body rigid with strain. It was far, far worse than it had been in the infirmary. Trickles of blood were not just seeping from the corners of his eyes. They were flowing freely, running down his cheeks like red tears. The blood vessels across the entire sclera of his eyes were ruptured, turning them a horrifying, uniform crimson. The strain. Aizawa gritted out, his voice hoarse with pain. It's fighting back. It feels alive. He was holding a god at bay, and the effort was tearing him apart. He was a man with an off switch trying to shut down a nuclear reactor that was actively resisting him. He held it for 5 seconds. 6. 7. Then, his body betrayed him. An involuntary, agonizing blink. It was all it took. The roar returned. The green-black light exploded from Izuku once more, the overflow state reasserting its dominance with a vengeance. A fresh shockwave of pure energy erupted, throwing Aizawa backwards and forcing All Might to shield his face. But this time, Izuku didn't panic. He didn't try to use a quirk. He did the only thing he could think of. He screamed, "No!" and focused every ounce of his will, every fiber of his being, on a single, desperate command. Stop. He poured his own terror, his own self-loathing, his own desperate desire not to be a monster into that single mental command. He wasn't fighting the storm. He was begging it, and for a reason he didn't understand. The power listened. It didn't vanish. It receded. The brilliant, terrifying light pulled back from his skin, retreating inward until only the faint, kintsugi-like lines remained. The oppressive hum died down to a low thrum. The world settled. He was left on his hands and knees in the middle of a scene of utter devastation, shaking uncontrollably. The test had been a catastrophic failure. He hadn't just failed to control 5%. He had proven he couldn't control any of it. He was a weapon that fired on its own, and the only safety switch was another person's agony. He looked at the ruin of the cooling tower, a monument to his failure. He looked at the cratered, broken ground around him. He looked at Aizawa, who was wiping blood from his face, his expression a mixture of pain and grim assessment. He looked at All Might, whose face was a portrait of heartbreak. The dream was dead. Utterly and completely. The dream of a hero who saves everyone with a smile. How could he smile when his very presence broke the world? How could he save someone from a collapsing building when he was the one who might cause it to collapse? He couldn't perform delicate rescue operations. He couldn't fight in a crowded city. He couldn't even stand next to his friends without the risk of hurting them. All Might started towards him, his steps slow, hesitant. "Young Midoriya, stay away," Izuku whispered, his voice broken. He pushed himself to his feet and stumbled away, putting distance between himself and his mentor. He couldn't bear the look of pity on his hero's face. He couldn't bear the thought of his reflexive power hurting him, too. He was a natural disaster in human form. A walking, talking singularity. The only way to keep everyone safe was to stay away from them. Bakugo's words came back to him. You either learn to ride it, or it eats you alive. He had tried to ride it. And it had thrown him, nearly destroying everything in the process. Maybe letting it eat him was the only option left. Maybe isolation wasn't a choice. Maybe it was his destiny. A new sound cut through the quiet aftermath. The distant but distinct whir of helicopter blades. It was approaching fast. Too fast to be a news chopper. Aizawa looked up, his expression hardening. "They're here already." "Who?" All Might asked, but he already suspected the answer. A sleek, black, unmarked helicopter descended, landing 100 yards away from the plaza. Its side door slid open, and 4 figures in dark, immaculate suits disembarked, their movements sharp and professional. They were followed by a man who radiated an aura of cold, unshakable authority. He was older, with silver-streaked black hair combed back perfectly, and narrow, intelligent eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that seemed immune to the wind and dust. Nizu's voice crackled over the small comms unit in Aizawa's ear. "It's the Hero Public Safety Commission. That's Director General Tsurigami Kenji. They must have been monitoring our energy readings. Be on your guard." The Director General and his entourage strode towards them, their polished shoes crunching on the debris. They stopped a respectful but firm distance away, their eyes taking in the scene, the collapsed tower, the cratered ground, Aizawa's blood-streaked face, and finally, Izuku, standing alone, a figure of pathetic misery amidst grand destruction. Tsurigami's gaze lingered on Izuku for a long moment, his expression unreadable. It was the look of a scientist studying a volatile chemical reaction. "All Might." "Aizawa-kun," he said, his voice smooth and utterly devoid of warmth. "Principal Nizu informed us you would be conducting a diagnostic. It appears the results are even more significant than we anticipated." "This is a UA matter, Director General," Aizawa said, his voice low and dangerous. He took a protective step, slightly repositioning himself between the officials and Izuku. Tsurigami gave a thin, dismissive smile. "What happened in Kamino, and what has just happened here, has elevated this situation far beyond a simple school matter. This is now an issue of national, and potentially global, security." He finally addressed Izuku directly, though his words felt aimed at everyone. "Izuku Midoriya, as of this moment, by the authority granted to me by the Special Powers Regulation Act, your status has been reclassified. You are no longer considered merely a student with a powerful quirk." He paused for effect, his cold eyes sweeping over Izuku's trembling form. "You are now designated a Special Phenomenon Class S. An asset of unparalleled potential and unprecedented risk." The bureaucratic terms were like ice water in Izuku's veins. Asset. Phenomenon. Risk. He was no longer a person. He was a thing to be classified and managed. "Therefore," Tsurigami continued, his voice leaving no room for argument, "the Hero Public Safety Commission will be taking immediate and full custody of you. You will be transported to a secure, deep-level facility where your condition can be studied and contained by our top researchers. It is for your own safety, and for the safety of the public." He wasn't asking. He was informing. "Absolutely not," Aizawa snarled, his hand tightening on his capture weapon. "He is my student. He stays here. Your student just leveled a reinforced structure with a stray thought and created a gravitational anomaly by accident," Tsurigami retorted, his voice hardening. "With all due respect, UA is a school. It is not equipped to handle a walking singularity event. We are." A tense standoff descended upon the ruined plaza. The government had come to claim its new weapon. Izuku stood frozen, the words washing over him. A deep-level facility. Studied. Contained. He was a lab rat. A bomb to be defused or perhaps re-engineered. He looked from the cold, determined face of the Director General to the fierce, protective glare of his teacher. He was no longer just a danger to his friends. He was a prize. A piece of property to be fought over by forces far beyond his control. His personal tragedy had just become a political crisis, and he was trapped, powerless, right in the center of it. The air in Training Ground Gamma was thick with unspoken threats. The quiet hum of the Commission's helicopter was a predator's purr, a promise of a cage. Director General Tsurigami stood like a statue carved from ice and bureaucracy, his declaration hanging in the air, absolute and unyielding. Asset. Property. Ours. Izuku felt a coldness spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the wind whipping across the plaza. He was a pawn on a chessboard he couldn't even see. He looked at Aizawa's defiant posture, at All Might's barely concealed rage, and felt a surge of guilt so profound it was nauseating. This was his fault. His desperate, selfish need for more power had brought this conflict to their doorstep. With all due respect, Director General. Aizawa's voice was a low growl, dangerously soft. My student is not a piece of equipment to be requisitioned. He is a human being, a child, who is injured and terrified. He needs education and support, not vivisection in a government black site. Tsurigami's thin lips tightened. Your sentiment is admirable, Aizawa-kun, but hopelessly naive. The child you speak of possesses a power that, by our most conservative estimates, could crack the tectonic plate he's standing on if he lost control. This is no longer about one boy's feelings. This is about risk mitigation on a national scale. He comes with us. It is not a request. As if on cue, the four agents behind Tsurigami subtly shifted their stances. They were Corcusers, their training and purpose radiating from them in waves Izuku could now vaguely perceive. A chilling stillness from one, a sharp, metallic energy from another. They were here to enforce the Director General's will. Before the standoff could escalate, a cheerful, high-pitched voice crackled through Aizawa's comms, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Now, Tsurigami-san! Let us not be hasty. While I appreciate the Commission's proactive stance, I believe there has been a slight misunderstanding of jurisdiction. Principal Niza's face appeared on the large monitor of a nearby, still functional terminal that Power Loader had activated from the bunker. His smile was wide and friendly, but his black eyes held a glint of pure, calculating steel. Izuku Midoriya is a student enrolled at Ue High School, and as such, he falls under my care and my responsibility. Niza chirped. Any attempts to remove him from my campus without a direct and uncontestable warrant from the highest court, which I assure you, you do not possess, would be considered a hostile act of kidnapping. My lawyers, who are on standby, would have a field day with the political and public fallout. Imagine the headlines. HPSC abducts traumatized child hero who saved Kamino. Tsurigami's impassive mask finally cracked. A flicker of annoyance crossed his features. Niza had him. The Director General operated in the gray areas, in the shadows of policy. A public, messy legal battle was the last thing he wanted, especially with public sentiment so high for the boy who had miraculously stopped the Nomu. This is reckless, Nizu, Tsurigami said, his voice losing its smooth edge. You cannot hope to contain him. Oh, I believe we can, Niza countered, his smile widening. After all, we are the greatest hero academy in the world. Our purpose is to nurture and guide overwhelming power. Izuku Midoriya is not a problem to be locked away. He is the ultimate educational challenge. A challenge I fully intend to meet. He will stay at Ue, where we will devise a curriculum to help him understand and manage his new condition. The Commission is, of course, welcome to send observers. From a safe distance, the unspoken threat was clear. He is my student, my responsibility, and if anything goes wrong, it is on my head. But you will not take him. Tsurigami stared at Niza's smiling digital face for a long, tense moment. He was a man accustomed to getting his way, but he was also a pragmatist. He had been outmaneuvered. For now. Very well, Principal. he said, the words clipped. Have it your way. But know this, the moment he poses an active threat you cannot contain, the moment there is a single civilian casualty, we will be back, and we will not be asking. We will consider this a temporary, probationary arrangement. He gave one last, cold look at Izuku, a look that said, I will be watching, before turning on his heel. His agents fell into step behind him, and they marched back to their helicopter without another word. As the black aircraft descended, casting a fleeting shadow over them, a collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the training ground. The immediate crisis was averted, but the tension remained. Aizawa finally allowed himself to relax his stance, but the exhaustion was plain on his face. He'll be back, Niza, I am counting on it. The principal's voice replied from the speaker. This has bought us time. Now we must use it wisely. Bring young Midoriya back. We have a great deal of work to do. As All Might gently guided a numb, silent Izuku towards the exit, he couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't been saved. He had merely been moved from one cage to another, this one just having more familiar bars. Deep beneath the earth, in the sterile, white confines of Tartarus prison, a different kind of observation was taking place. All for One sat in his high-tech straitjacket, his body immobile, his face a mask of scar tissue. To any observer, he was a dormant monster, a neutralized threat. But his mind was a whirlwind of triumphant revelation. He had felt it. He had not seen it, but he had felt the moment it happened. A tremor in the force that bound all quirks together. He had felt the spike of One for All, a power he knew more intimately than any other, as it surged past every known limit. And then, he had felt the signature of his own creation, the high-end Noma Terminus, simply vanish. Not destroyed. Not defeated. Erased. It was a sensation he had never experienced. It was a violation of the fundamental law he had built his empire upon. Quirks could be taken, given, combined, but not unmade. And now, listening to the hushed, terrified whispers of the guards discussing the Kamino singularity, a smile stretched the ruined flesh of his face. It was a grotesque, horrifying sight. Oh, Yoichi! He whispered to the empty, sterile air, his voice a dry, rasping sound. You beautiful, sentimental fool! You tried to create a sword to slay me, and instead, you forged a god. The plan had always been to let Tamura Shigaraki grow, to cultivate his rage and decay until he was a suitable vessel to steal One for All. But this changed everything. This new, evolved state of the quirk was beyond anything he had ever imagined. It was the apotheosis. The final, perfect form of power itself. To steal it now would not just be victory, it would be ascension. He closed his eyes, his consciousness reaching out, pulling on the subtle threads of connection he still had to the outside world, to the network of spies and loyalists that not even Tartarus could completely sever. A single, overriding command pulsed from his mind, a directive that would ripple through the underworld. The target was no longer just the quirk. It was the vessel. In a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of the city, Tamura Shigaraki scratched furiously at his neck, his skin raw and bleeding. The remnants of the Paranormal Liberation Front were scattered, licking their wounds after the disastrous war. But his master's voice, a phantom whisper in the back of his mind, was clearer than ever. The boy Tamura. All for One's mental voice hissed, laced with a giddy, almost insane excitement. Izuku Midoriya. You felt it too, did you not? The sheer, beautiful wrongness of it. Shigaraki shuddered, the memory of that wave of power making his teeth ache. He had been miles away, and he had felt it like a physical blow. A power that made his own decay feel crude and childish. Forget the heroes. Forget societal collapse. There is only one prize now, the voice commanded. All other objectives are secondary. Gather your strength. Gather Gigantomachia. Your new purpose is simple, capture the ninth. Bring me the vessel. And Tamura, be very, very careful. Do not harm him. The container is now as precious as the contents. That power, that perfect power, is my birthright. Shigaraki's scratching stopped. A slow, cracked grin spread across his face. His master wanted the boy. And what his master wanted, he would get. It was time to remind the world what true fear felt like. The days that followed were a special kind of hell for Izuku. He was moved from the infirmary to a custom-built room in the Heights Alliance dormitory. It looked normal on the surface, but Cementos had quietly reinforced the walls, and Power Loader had lined them with an energy-dampening alloy. He was no longer in a concrete box, but the feeling of being a prisoner remained. He isolated himself. He ate his meals alone, delivered to his door. He didn't attend classes, his academic work sent to him on a tablet. He was terrified of his own body, of the reflexive pulse of power that had thrown Bakugo. What if he tripped in the hallway? What if someone startled him? The potential for accidental catastrophe was infinite. His classmates tried to reach out. Uraraka would leave snacks by his door with cheerful, worried notes. Ida would stand outside and lecture his door about the importance of camaraderie and mental fortitude. Kirishima would just knock and say, "Hey, Midoriya, we're all here for you, man." He heard them all. Thanks to his curse of a quirk, he heard every word, every worried sigh, every footstep that hesitated outside his room before walking away. And each one was a fresh stab of guilt. They were trying to help, and he was hiding from them, treating them like they were the danger, when he knew the truth was the other way around. One person who didn't try to coddle him was Bakugo. The door to Izuku's room burst open one afternoon without a knock. Bakugo stood there, dressed in his workout gear, a scowl etched on his face. Izuku immediately scrambled to the far corner of the room, his hands held up. "Kaken, no! Get out! It's not safe!" "Shut up!" Bakugo snapped, stepping inside and kicking the door shut behind him. He stayed near the doorway, respecting the distance, but his presence filled the room. "I'm not here for a pity party. I'm here because you're being a damn idiot." He tossed something onto Izuku's bed. It was a pair of old, worn sparring gloves. "You're right," Bakugo said, his voice hard. "It's not safe. You're a time bomb. So what are you going to do about it? You gonna wait for the commission to haul you off to some lab? You gonna wait for Shigaraki and his freaks to come knocking? Or are you going to get off your ass and do something?" Izuku stared at the gloves, then back at Bakugo, confused. "What can I do? I tried. You saw what happened at Gamma. I can't even use 5%. "Yeah, I saw," Bakugo confirmed. "You tried to bottle up a hurricane. It didn't work. So stop trying to bottle it up." He took a step closer, his red eyes intense. "That thing you did to me, the push, it wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a smash. It was something else. It felt like you were telling me to get lost, and the whole universe agreed with you." He pointed a finger at Izuku. "You've got all this shit leaking out of you, 24/7. You're not going to stop it. So stop trying. Learn to live with it. Learn to use the leak." Izuku didn't understand. "Use the leak? How? How should I know?" Bakugo shot back. "But sitting in here moping isn't going to figure it out. We're going to train. Every day. Just you and me." "Train?" Izuku's voice was a squeak of terror. "Kaken, I'll kill you!" A humorless, feral grin spread across Bakugo's face. "You can try. My explosions, they're not just punches. They're overwhelming bursts of energy. They're loud. They're bright. They're chaotic. If anything can stand up to the ambient crap spewing out of you, it's me. I'll be your sparring partner. I'll be your damn lightning rod. I'll push you until that overflow isn't just some random bullshit reflex, but a tool you can aim." The offer was insane. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was also the first glimmer of hope Izuku had felt in days. Bakugo wasn't treating him like a fragile piece of glass or a rabid dog. He was treating him like what he always had, a rival. He wasn't offering sympathy. He was offering a challenge. He was refusing to be left behind, refusing to let Izuku give up. In his own abrasive, aggressive way, he was saying, "I'm not afraid of you." "Why?" Izuku whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Why would you do that?" Bakugo's scowl deepened. He looked away, kicking at a loose thread on the rug. "Because," he muttered, his voice dropping so low Izuku could barely hear it. "That day, with the sludge villain, you ran in when you were quirkless and useless. You ran in for me." He looked back up, his crimson eyes burning with a fire Izuku hadn't seen in a long time, not just anger, but a fierce, possessive determination. I'm not going to be the guy who gets saved, and I'm sure as hell not going to let you be beaten by your own damn quirk. Your power is my goal. I'm going to surpass you. And I can't do that if you're a quivering mess in a padded room. So get up, nerd. We've got work to do. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they weren't tears of fear or despair. They were tears of gratitude. He wasn't alone in his cage. Someone was willing to step inside with him. Meanwhile, another hunt was underway. Himiko Toga danced along the rooftops of Muzurifu, a joyful, deadly wraith in the twilight. The city below was on edge, the aftermath of the Kamino battle a constant topic of nervous conversation. Heroes patrolled in greater numbers. Curfews were in effect. The air was thick with anxiety. Toga loved it. It made everything feel so much more alive. She wasn't with Shigaraki. She had heard the command, capture the boy. But her own motivations were far more personal. She wasn't interested in Izuku Midoriya as a vessel or a weapon. That was boring. That was what stuffy men like the Director General, or her own boss wanted. She was interested in the real Izuku. She had seen the footage, of course. But she had also been there, lurking in the shadows on the periphery of the battle. She had seen it with her own two eyes. The moment he had snapped, the incandescent light, the raw power, the way he had unmade that monster. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She had always been drawn to him, to the way he fought so hard he broke himself, covered in his own precious blood. She loved that passion, that desperate drive. But this was something more. This was his true self, his inner core, bursting out for the whole world to see. It was pure, unrestrained passion. It was the ultimate expression of love and rage. He hadn't just defeated his enemy. He had loved his mentor so much that he had rewritten the laws of reality to save him, and she wanted it. She didn't just want his blood anymore. That was a pale imitation. She wanted to see that light again. She wanted to be close to it, to feel it. She wanted to push him, to cut him, to make him so happy and so angry that he would show her that beautiful, true part of himself again. If she could become him, just for a moment, while he was in that state, what would that feel like? To be a god of emerald light? Her mission was simple. She had to get close to him. She had to get into UA. She had a plan. A hospital near UA was running a blood drive for victims of the recent villain attacks. A recovery worker, a nurse, a grieving family member. There were so many faces she could wear, so many ways to get close. She giggled, a sweet, chilling sound on the evening wind, as she licked a drop of blood from a fresh cut on her thumb. Her target wasn't a prize to be captured. He was a boy to be loved, and she was going to love him until he broke wide open. Training Ground Beta. The replica city was their new sparring arena. It was dusk. The long shadows of the fake buildings stretched across the empty streets. Bakugo stood 100 feet away from Izuku, his gauntlets primed, a savage grin on his face. All right, Deku. Rule number 1. You are not allowed to try and use a named attack. No smashes, no 100% bullshit. Rule number 2. You are not allowed to try and turn it off. You live with the leak. The goal isn't to fight me. The goal is to survive me while that crap is flowing out of you. Izuku nodded, his body tense. He was terrified, but Bakugo's insane confidence was infectious. He took a deep breath, and as he had been practicing in his room, he didn't try to suppress the storm. He just let it be. The faint green lines on his skin brightened slightly, the low hum of his power becoming more audible. Good, Bakugo grunted. Now, let's see what that rejection field of yours can do when it's not catching me by surprise. He blasted off, not in a straight line, but in a chaotic, zigzagging pattern, using his explosions to ricochet off the sides of buildings. He was a blur of orange and black, impossible to track. AP shot! Autocannon! A volley of focused, piercing explosions shot towards Izuku from 3 different angles at once. Izuku's instinct screamed at him to dodge, to use full cowl. But he held his ground, his knuckles white. Don't fight it. Live with it. As the first AP shot came within 10 feet of him, the air around him shimmered. The reflexive pulse of power, the one that had thrown Bakugo, flared. The focused explosion was met by the invisible wall of warped space. It didn't detonate against the shield. It was prematurely triggered, the force of the blast diffusing harmlessly in the empty air, as if it had hit a soap bubble instead of a target. The other shots met the same fate, all of them detonating a safe distance away from him. It worked. The leak was a perfect, automatic defense. Bakugo landed, skidding to a halt. Ha! So it's a shield. A perfect, automatic shield. Not bad. But what happens when the attacker gets inside it? Before Izuku could process the question, Bakugo was moving again. He fired a massive explosion at the ground, using the smokescreen to cover his approach. He burst through the cloud, already inside the 10-foot radius of the automatic shield. He threw a right hook, his fist crackling with explosive energy. Izuku reacted on pure instinct, throwing up an arm to block. But he didn't feel the impact. The moment Bakugo's fist entered his immediate personal space, about a foot from his body, the repulsion field flared again, but this time it was more focused. It didn't throw Bakugo across the street, it just stopped him. His fist hit a wall of immovable air, his momentum completely negated. TCH, Bakugo grunted, pushing against the unseen force. It was like pushing against solid steel. So the closer I get, the stronger it is. Let's test that. The sparring session was unlike any fight they had ever had. It was a bizarre dance. Bakugo, with his overwhelming offense, trying to find a weakness in Izuku's overwhelming, unintentional defense. He couldn't get close enough to land a solid blow. But Izuku couldn't move without the risk of the overflow state surging. He was a fortress, but also a prisoner within its walls. This is useless! Bakugo finally roared, frustrated. He was panting, having expended a huge amount of energy for zero payoff. You're just a damn turtle! You can't just stand there and let the power do everything. You have to guide it. Shape it. Tell it what to do. I don't know how. Izuku yelled back, his own frustration mounting. Then figure it out. Suddenly, a new voice, light and sickly sweet, cut through their argument. He's right, you know, Izuku-kun. Both boys froze. They turned towards the source of the voice. Perched on the edge of a nearby rooftop, silhouetted against the dying sun, was a figure in a simple school uniform. Himiko Toga. She had a wide, crazed smile on her face, and she was holding a half-eaten apple in one hand and a combat knife in the other. You look so much cuter when you're not holding back, she cooed. That bright, shiny light, it's the real you, isn't it? I want to see it again. Bakugo's eyes widened in rage. You! How did you get in here? Oh, it was easy! Toga giggled. UA's security is so focused on keeping people out, they don't pay much attention to the service tunnels underneath. Especially the ones connected to the hospital next door. She took a bite of her apple, then dropped it, her smile widening as she brandished her knife. Her eyes were locked on Izuku, burning with a predatory, obsessive adoration. I want to see you break, Izuku-kun. I want to cut you and see all that pretty light spill out. With an inhuman burst of speed, she leaped from the roof, flipping through the air and landing silently on the street between them. She was fast. Faster than she had ever been. She lunged, not at Izuku, but at Bakugo. It was a brilliant tactical move. She knew Izuku's instinct was to protect. Bakugo, caught off guard by her sudden appearance, reacted a split second too late. Toga's knife slashed across his arm, drawing a line of bright red blood. Kaken! Izuku screamed. The sight of his friend being hurt, the flash of red blood, it was a trigger. The same trigger as in the Kamino battle. His control shattered. The power didn't just leak, it flooded. The overload state surged through him, the emerald and black energy exploding from his body. The ground cracked, the air hummed, his eyes began to glow. Toga squealed in delight. Yes! There it is! So beautiful! She ignored Bakugo and charged straight at Izuku, her knife held high, her face a mask of ecstatic glee. She wanted to be at the center of the storm. DKU, you idiot! Bakugo's voice, a roar of pure, focused rage, cut through Izuku's panic. Don't try to stop it! Aim it! Use me as a fucking target! Point it at her! The words were an anchor in the hurricane. Don't stop it. Aim it. Izuku looked at the charging Toga, then at Bakugo, who was clutching his bleeding arm but grinning like a maniac. He understood. He couldn't suppress the power, but maybe he could give it a direction. He stopped fighting the surge. He stopped trying to force it back inside. He embraced it. He focused all his panic, all his fear, all his desperate need to protect Bakugo, not into a punch, but into a single, focused intent. Get her away from him. He didn't move. He didn't even raise a hand. He just pushed. With his mind. This time, the flare of his power wasn't an omnidirectional pulse. It was a focused, directed wave. The invisible wall of spatial rejection that had formed around him coalesced into a battering ram of pure force, aimed directly at Toga. Toga, who was about to gleefully stab him, suddenly hit the wall of warped space. Her eyes widened in surprise as her forward momentum ceased instantly, and was violently reversed. She was blasted backwards, tumbling end over end through the air, before crashing into the facade of a building 50 feet away. She hit it hard, slumping to the ground, stunned but giggling madly. The moment the threat was gone, the power receded. The glow in Izuku's eyes faded. He was left panting, his heart hammering, but he was standing. He had done it. He had controlled it. Just for a second, he looked at his hands, then at Bakugo. He had aimed the nuke. Bakugo stared at the downed Toga, then back at Izuku, a slow, wild grin spreading across his face. See? He said, his voice laced with triumph and adrenaline. I told you. You just needed to learn how to aim. Before they could react further, alarms blared across the training ground. Aizawa, Endeavor, and a dozen other pro-heroes swarmed the area, alerted to the breach. Toga, laughing, threw down a smoke pellet and vanished into the shadows, her objective complete. She had seen the light. And she knew how to summon it. Izuku stood his ground as the heroes surrounded them. He was still terrified. He was still a danger, but for the first time since he had crossed the limit, he felt a flicker of something he thought he had lost forever: hope.